Hey folks, Craig Danger, vinyl record player, here today to talk about Terry Reid, really one of British rock's greatest misses in terms of just an absolute talent who unfortunately had terrible luck and absolutely worse timing that meant a man who really should have been one of the sort of absolute well-renowned legends of the 1960s and 1970s, and instead he ended up actually having still quite a good career in music, but not really at the level I think that he truly deserved. Today we talk about Terry Reid. And we're back, and you know what? Actually, Terry Reid just passed this week, and as is kind of customary on the channel, when an absolute legend that I really can't get over passes, I like to at least do a tribute video. I was under the assumption that there would not be a lot of Terry Reid tribute videos, and that unfortunately just breaks down to the fact that a lot of it has to do with the nature of Terry Reid's career and the difficulties he had, despite, again, the talent was there, the songs were there, the voice, the guitar, and yet at the same time, the success kind of never really followed, despite some of the circumstances. And as I go into the story of Terry, just absolutely mind-blowing. So, Terence James Reid, born November 13th, 1949 in Cambridgeshire, England, and died, of course, August 4th, 2025. He was 75 years old. Really an absolute master singer and guitarist. Terry's career begins really in the mid-60s when he joined a band called Peter Jay and The Jaywalkers. They really lasted about one album, and basically there's not much after that. Once that band goes sort of its separate ways, Terry, of course, becomes a solo artist and ends up signing up with Mickey Most, who at the time was kind of one of those super producer agents who basically handled the production and most of the promotion work for artists like the Animals and the Yardbirds, a lot of pop groups at the time. That unfortunately would turn out to be a bit of a terrible decision, one that unfortunately, how could he have known at the time? One of the interesting things about certainly his early career, in a way, this is basically the guy who helped invent Led Zeppelin. And that really mainly breaks down to the fact that he was friends with Jimmy Page, who came to him and said, "Hey Terry, would you like to sing in my new band?" And Terry Reid at the time, he was in the midst of touring actually this record, his debut record, Bang Bang, You're Terry Reid, from 1968. And he basically says to Jimmy Page, "Sorry Jimmy, I'm kind of in the midst of touring with the Rolling Stones, but I can recommend a couple of guys for your band." Of course, those guys ended up being Robert Plant and also, of course, John Bonham, which basically sealed the deal for that band, which, as we all know, Led Zeppelin went on to be gigantic. Terry Reid sadly did not. This record, though, is really a fantastic, sort of, I'm going to call it a beginner record. This is not Terry at his best, certainly, but one of the best songs on this one, Without Expression. And I will have a playlist of some really amazing songs by Terry below, so check the comments. Absolutely. Terry Reid is someone that everyone, I feel, if you like rock, you should hear Terry Reid. If you like soul, you should probably hear Terry Reid as well. But getting back to the story of Terry, this album, of course, comes out in '68. Really kind of a cool looking record. Like I say, Without Expression, he actually wrote at 15. There's a great live version from the BBC from about the mid-'70s, and absolutely fantastic track. But this one, of course, has the title track, Bang Bang You're Dead, which I think was also a Sonny and Cher hit. But very classic stuff by him. This is kind of typical sort of late 60s rock, not in a hard rocking mode, but there's a lot of nice sort of Hammond organ on this. And Terry, again, amazing voice and, some reasonable sort of guitar playing. This one, of course, would not sell incredibly well, but it did net him some excellent support gigs, certainly with the Rolling Stones. But also, who's coming into town in '68? Aretha Franklin. One of the famous quotes that you'll see all over the place is, at the time, Aretha Franklin said, "What's going on in England? Well, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Terry Reid." So clearly she'd seen Terry, and again, he was known as kind of a fantastic live player. He records this album, and then of course in and around the same time period, he records his self-titled, also just absolutely a huge progression, I feel, from the first album, which of course is Terry Reid. This album, Silver White Light, is an absolute bombastic sort of rock jam. Very similar, I would say his voice kind of does take on a little bit of a tinge of Steve Marriott, obviously of Humble Pie and of the Small Faces. And absolutely, he's coming into his own on this record. Also on this record, of course, is a great cover of Highway 61 Revisited, interspersed really with one of his own songs called Friends. Another really classic stuff. This is him sort of beginning to build on that first album, but most importantly, there's great keyboards all over this album. You start to see the Terry Reid guitar style coming up to the fray, and in my opinion, certainly it is the best from his early period in the 1960s. So what happens after Terry Reid? Well, unfortunately, Terry and Mickey Most, his agent, unfortunately have a huge disagreement on what they want Terry to become. Mickey Most insists that he become basically somewhat of a formulaic balladeer. Terry Reid says, no, I'm going to do my own thing. And unfortunately, what happens is basically Terry Reid's career ends up kind of in the hinterland for the next 3 to 4 years. He does a lot of live spots. He ends up actually meeting with the sort of multi-instrumentalist extraordinaire David Lindley from the band Kaleidoscope. Obviously, later on, David Lindley would go on to do his own work. Really fantastic slide player. Finally, after some years of being in court with Mickey Most, etc., he would actually put together an album for Atlantic called River. And River is an interesting one, a little bit more, I would say, less compact of a record. You can tell it was very much of a jammy type of record. Dean kind of starts off this album, and it's kind of seen as an EP. This album was actually recorded twice. It was recorded once in England and once in America, actually, with super producer Tom Dowd on the Atlantic label. And basically what resulted was about a 6-7 track album. Again, these are all longer tracks, a lot jammier, kind of a little bit of a Southern soul, sort of a Black Crowsy feel, some of this early stuff, and just wow. Also a really good record. David Lindley, again, is on this, a lot of fantastic slide playing. He was, of course, playing with Alan White of Yes, and sort of midway through the recording of River, Alan White leaves, which was actually why they ended up recording it twice. It was a bit of a blow because he had been playing with Alan White for a couple of years. Alan White leaves, goes and starts playing with Yes. So anyway, River is released by Atlantic. Again, doesn't really do very much. So in the meantime, Terry does a lot of live work, he does a lot of session work, and in 1976, he signs with ABC Records for, of course, this classic. And in my opinion, this, by all means, is Terry Reid's just absolute meisterwork. Produced by Graham Nash, lots of fantastic songs. Starts out with Faith to Arise, Seed of Memory. The title track, of course, is just absolutely legendary. But this whole album is really, should have been, in my opinion, and frankly, as Craig Danger, the vinyl record player, I'm willing to say that my opinion is this is one of the best records of 1976. Problem, again, with the timing, this album, despite being produced by Graham Nash, obviously of Crosby, Stills and Nash, one of the sort of 1970s luminaries, released exactly on the week that his record label, ABC Records, goes out of business. So, of course, sells absolutely nothing and is actually not even that easy to get. It is not on streaming. I don't know that it's ever been released on compact disc. It should be. It's possible now that Terry has passed that certainly this could become available. But oh, what a fantastic record. This is his back-to-back classic as far as I'm concerned. From track one, Faith to Arise, which is an absolutely fantastic song. Seed of Memory. Of course, also To Be Treated Right, Brave Awakening. Like I say, this album is, in my opinion, an absolute classic. One of those missed opportunities, really, not just for Terry, but in my opinion, the record buying public. This is a guy who had the looks. I mean, he had the feathered hair. I mean, come on with the feathered hair. Classic artist. And yeah, like I say, everything was set for this to absolutely explode as a record. Critically acclaimed as well. Unfortunately, sold buckets. That happens when your label, of course, goes out of business. And actually, funny thing about this particular record is I discovered this because there was a Rob Zombie horror film, and basically it was either Rob Zombie or one of the producers or whatever who actually pointed this record out, and there's a couple of tracks that actually ended up on that soundtrack. And I will put, of course, the name of that movie right here, but you know what? That for a while was the only way you could actually even hear these songs on the internet, and they are still actually out there. They will be, of course, in the playlist. But you know what? This album, absolutely legendary. And those folks in the early 2000s who actually managed to see this White Zombie movie, I don't know that there was a lot of them, but you know what? Terry Reid's contribution, it kind of reignited Terry Reid sort of as a singer. He actually did quit for a long period of time as a solo artist between 81 and about 91. He actually became a backing vocalist, doing a lot of session vocal work as well as guitar work throughout that period. There is an album also from 1979. Again, it's not my favorite. It's similar to this and doesn't have as deeply 80s production. And then of course there is another album called The Driver from 1991, which is kind of his last sort of major solo work, of course produced by Trevor Horn, who also produced a number of luminaries, mainly Yes, but of course there's a lot of places. The issue I have with that record is, the production on that is so strongly 80s, very, very thick with its 80s-ness, but the songs are still there. One of the things I learned while I was researching this actually was that he actually did some work with Joe Perry of Aerosmith, guitarist from Aerosmith, in and around 2018. And one other thing, if you look on the internet there's actually a lot of stuff on YouTube to see Terry Reid live, and the vocals and often the sound, these are not professionally recorded videos, is often really weak. And in fact, for a good period of time, it was my assumption. And again, if you read up about Terry, towards the end of his life, he did a lot of drinking and chain smoking, and we know what that can do to a voice. But what's interesting about this record, which is called Sweetserland, believe it or not, from Joe Perry in 2018, there are a couple of collaborations with Terry Reid where he writes the songs but also sings, and you know what? It's almost like no time has passed. I was a little bit shocked because, again, when you look at some of those live videos, they're not the best. Again, I think that does come down to recording, because if you listen to those Joe Perry tracks, it's clear that Terry Reid still is a fantastic singer and really, in my opinion, an absolute legend. Something else to note is not only did Terry Reid turn down and then somewhat kind of help invent Led Zeppelin, but in the early 70s, when Deep Purple were moving on from their original vocalist and edging towards Ian Gillan, Terry Reid was actually asked by legendary guitarist Ritchie Blackmore to join Deep Purple as a vocalist. Again, there were probably business issues involved at that time because of Mickey Most's issue and a lot of the problems with the courts at that time, and Mickey Most and whatever deal they had made. So of course, Terry Reid declined that. Ian Gillan steps in, and Deep Purple really becomes what is kind of universally recognized as the best version of Deep Purple. In fact, a version that semi-continues until this day. I believe Ian Gillan still sings with Deep Purple after, that is, of course, an absolute other story. But just again wanted to pay tribute to an absolute legend in my mind. All of these records are available. The one I guess that is the most difficult to find is this one. It is my hope that, you know, there's some ability to get this record out of the vault and have it, you know, press the CD, put on streaming, and perhaps even a repress. I think it's probably due of this one. Those are always hard to tell because when you have music business bankruptcies, things go to strange owners and music goes into weird places, and one kind of can never really tell. But I guess as a final note, let's talk a little bit about some of the legends that Terry Reid actually collaborated with. In the 80s, of course, he did a lot of backing vocal work, including with Don Henley. Sort of hip-hop super producer Dr. Dre actually discovered this very album in the earlier, I believe the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, and actually worked with Terry. He kind of got obsessed with this record, which, believe me, I understand Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre, Craig Danger understands. Because wow, fantastic record. And they actually worked on some tracks together. Those were unfortunately never released. There's a couple of partnerships that he actually worked with Alabama 3, who of course did the theme song to The Sopranos. He worked with Joe Perry, as I previously mentioned. And in that sort of period where he put his solo career on hold, of course, he worked with not only Don Henley, but also Jackson Browne and Bonnie Raitt. And I think it's something that a lot of people who even might be Terry Reid fans don't really know. But again, his career kind of continued up until very recently. I believe he was still playing gigs. And in fact, he actually was on a few dance records. And again, the Joe Perry collaboration comes really late in his career, around 2018. But again, I just wanted to pay tribute to, in my opinion, this absolute legend of rock and roll who passed, unfortunately, earlier this week, August 4th, 2025. Terry Reid, an absolutely, completely underrated artist, and in my opinion, one of the best 70s rockers. Unfortunately, the material is not there, and that came down to business issues, luck issues, timing issues. If there was a poster boy for legendary artists who had all the ingredients and none of the difficulties except for maybe terrible luck, it would be Terry Reid. Again, rest in peace to Terry James Reid, absolute legend in my opinion, and of course passed this week, August 4th, 2025.